Welcome back. Now, the High Court in Johannesburg is today expected to hear an urgent application by an organisation called Democracy in Action to oppose State Capture Commission Chairperson Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's handover of the Commission's first report to President Cyril Ramaphosa. According to the urgent application, the DIA says Ramaphosa is not fit to receive the report because several witnesses who had been called to testify before the Commission had implicated him in wrongdoing. The organisation has instead suggested that the report be handed over to Deputy President David Mabuza. Deputy Chief Justice Zondo is expected to hand over the first of the Commission's three-part report to the President later today. Now, for more on these developments, we are joined by legal journalist Karyn Maughan. Karyn, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live. Firstly, let's take a look at Democracy in Action's court challenge to stop the report handover to the President. What's that about?
Well, essentially, Democracy in Action is bringing an interdict to stop President Cyril Ramaphosa from releasing the report pending a Part B of its application, which you referred to in your introduction, in which DIA essentially argues that Ramaphosa is implicated by evidence led at the Commission by certain unnamed witnesses who aren't identified in relation specifically to the Bosasa matter, where his son Andile, we know, received payments from, had done work with Bosasa, and he himself received a campaign donation. And of course, also this issue around him having shares in the Optimum coal mine as a consequence of his business dealings with Glencore. In relation to Glencore, of course, Ramaphosa saying that he sold those shares in December 2012 when he became deputy president. Nonetheless, DIA is saying he's simply too conflicted and they want to apply for the report to either go to Deputy President David Mabuza or to Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane. And they're saying that she should be potentially also given the power to implement the recommendations, if any, that are articulated by the report.
Does the challenge have any real legal prospect or merit, and what are the possible scenarios should it even succeed?
Well, the Commission have filed, I think they were going to try and attempt to file an affidavit late last night, but they have filed a 2-page notice of opposition to the urgent application, simply saying this case isn't urgent. You've known about this for 6 months. You've known that President Cyril Ramaphosa was going to receive the report for 6 months. Even the matters that are articulated in the application have been public knowledge for a very long time. So why on the 11th hour then bring this application? Your urgency is self-created, and we believe that the case should simply be dismissed out of hand. Of course, the urgent court in the Johannesburg High Court will need to make a determination on that argument. But I strongly suspect that the case is quite likely to be kicked out on the issue of urgency because, as the Commission has argued, this was not something that DIA was not aware of.
But the chairperson, Thabo Mthweni, then argues that he's written to the Commission before to raise these issues and he never got a response. So he had no other choice but to go to court.
Well, the argument there is, well, why did you not go to court sooner? You've had this knowledge for 6 months. Yes, you may have written to the Commission, but that's not a basis necessarily to say, well, this was my last resort. If one looks at the urgent application that was brought in relation to Shell's blasting, that's a typical scenario that is urgent. People were not aware of what was going on. Urgent action needed to be taken over the lack of consultation, and it was taken. I think the biggest hurdle for DIA this morning is going to be convincing the court that, look, this was why we took this action so late, literally a few hours before this handover is due to happen. The other problem, of course, is that, as the Commission has articulated in that 2-page document, Ramaphosa already has the report. He was ordered, the Commission was ordered to hand it over to him on the 31st of December. By the court. It has done so. The reason that we have the ceremonial handover, of course, a few days later, is because of the passing of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which the presidency and I think everyone felt should not be overshadowed by events around the inquiry's report. So Ramaphosa has the report, unless, there's some kind of change in the nature of the application brought today. The horse is bolted. There's not much that the court can now interdict.
Mm-hmm. And what is the president obliged to do with it, given the fact that he already has it?
Well, he is obliged to produce an action plan and then present it to Parliament. We know that initially when Public Protector Julie Madonsela produced the State of Capture report, she had foreseen an inquiry that was going to be 180 days. 6 months. It was going to focus on the issue of the Guptas, former President Jacob Zuma's relationship to them, the issues that arose at Eskom as a consequence, allegedly, of that relationship. It then ballooned into this massive investigation that now comprises of between 12 and 15 different parts. And the first part, of course, being very much focused on, as we understand it, Transnet, SAA, and other aviation issues. So Ramaphosa, in response to each of these three parts of the report that will be handed over, this first part, of course, consisting of 3 volumes and being something like 800 pages long, will need to put together an action plan in terms of what does he do in response to the recommendations, and he needs to present that to Parliament. But in addition to that, there's going to be huge pressure around law enforcement agencies, particularly the NPA, to really come up with a strong policy that ensures that there is accountability for these massive alleged issues of state capture, and that people are held responsible. And I think that there may be future litigation in regards to ensuring that the NPA actually meets those obligations.
What do you expect from part 1?
Well, as I said before, my understanding is that it focuses on Transnet, which is really important because we see state capture very much in terms of what happened at Eskom. Eskom has an immediate consequence for all our daily lives as citizens, with the blackouts and the kind of issues we face. But when you look at the Gupta leaks, when you look at the evidence that was led, the heart and soul of the state capture alleged looting actually occurred at Transnet. We know that about 57 billion rands worth of so-called state capture contracts were given to the Gupta network. And about 40 billion rand of that was exclusively at Transnet. So, and that was under the leadership of Brian Molefe and Anaj Singh, who then moved to Eskom, where something like 11 billion rands worth of state capture contracts are awarded. So it's going to be about those particular individuals in that organization, what happened with the South China Rail deal, China-South Rail deal, which ballooned, I think, from 38 billion to something like 54 billion on allegedly spurious grounds. There have been allegations of massive kickbacks to the Gupta network as a consequence of that. So it really is an issue that is ripe for potential criminal prosecution and investigation. We know the NPA has already done some work in that regard, and the SIU's case with Eskom in relation to Molefe and others does refer in some part to what happened at Transnet, but it's really going to be about Zondo's examination of that parastatal, what occurred there, and whether he feels that indeed there is a basis for even further investigation and prosecution of those particular individuals.
And what can really be done about the individuals who may be implicated? I mean, we spoke about Brian Molefe. That's the top name that comes out of that report as well.
Well, the SIU is currently in the process of seeking, I think, about 3.8 billion rand in damages from Molefe, Koko, and others in relation to so-called state capture looting that occurred as a consequence of the Optimum, the Glencore sale, of Optimum to the Gupta family network. So, there is some legal action in regards to that. Of course, the Gupta family say that their lawyers have described that case as a national embarrassment waiting to happen. And, of course, we know that, there's preemptive litigation in terms of all those people saying that the case is actually doesn't actually make a case against them and should be thrown out right at the beginning. So, there is an attempt to recoup money. Whether or not it'll be successful, I think, is a matter for the courts to decide. But, I think it is crucial. Eskom is saying as well that, suggesting in media reports that they would be very open to bringing private prosecutions forward if the NPA is unable, because of capacity issues, to bring those cases to court. And I think that is one of the pivotal issues. The NPA needs to put firm policies on the table that will enable it, through perhaps private state hybrid prosecutions, through private prosecutions, to ensure accountability. Because at the moment, we know over and over again that the NPA says we don't have forensic capacity. These state capture cases are very difficult, if not impossible, for us to prosecute. We understand that. But then the NPA needs to take advantage of all the entities, be it civil society, people like, organizations like Eskom that are saying, look, we are ready and willing to assist you in bringing these cases to court, prosecute these cases. How can we actually do that?
And given how long this commission has gone on for, do you think South Africans are patient enough to let that process take its place?
There are some quick wins that the NPA could score on. And I think that, South Africans are so corruption exhausted. And I think, the recent issue with PPEs, where we saw the health minister, Zweli Mkhize, forced to resign, shows quite categorically that you can't blame the so-called state capture corruption, this culture of corruption, on one individual or, the former President Jacob Zuma. This is a pathology of unfortunately, the ruling party's way of doing something, doing things. There are issues around KDIP deployment. There are issues around kickbacks. Political party funding legislation has changed, so people are no longer allowed to fund political parties like the ANC in secret. All of that is welcome. But, ultimately, it's about real action being taken, money being recovered, which we know in certain instances it has been, corporates being forced to pay cash back to the South African people from whom they looted that money, and ultimately people being taken to court and forced to account for their actions and their decisions, and in a way that is respects all of their fair trial rights and ultimately results in a fair outcome. Otherwise, I think, as I've said before, the Zondo inquiry is really about opening up our entire, country to a really close examination of just how badly this rot of corruption has sickened us as a nation. Mm-hmm. And if we aren't given a prospect of almost getting well, of those things have been cut out and dealt with in a decisive way, and that includes the ANC taking firm steps against the officials that are implicated by the commission, then I'm afraid the South African public would be right to say, well, what was the point? Mm-hmm.
And do you think we focused enough on other entities of state that may have been affected by corruption? Yes, we've spoken about the big ones, Eskom, Transnet, but do you think the Zondo Commission might have missed some of these smaller ones that fell off the radar?
I think the problem is that, we've got unfortunately, such an endemic culture of corruption that there, of course, will be things that fall off the radar, because I think it's insidious, from everyone, people getting stopped by Metro Police to people having to pay money to try and get documents from Home Affairs. This is something that affects every single South African. It's literally part of our culture as a country, and that is extremely, extremely damaging. But I think at some point, the Zondo inquiry had to say, okay, we have to stop now. We have to deal with the evidence that we've led, and we've got to make firm recommendations in regard to this. And also, I would hope, make firm recommendations in regard to, for example, treatment of whistleblowers, protection of whistleblowers, bolstering up the state so that it can prosecute these cases, rewarding whistleblowers so that they're not persecuted when they speak out, those kind of issues, ensuring parliamentary oversight. There are systemic recommendations that the Commission can make, which I would hope will carry forward into our society going forward and enable us to really start recovering from the damage that corruption has done to us as a nation and as a people.
And do you think the Zondo Commission will then open the way forward for, further investigations into corruption into this country, or is this the commission's rather a way to go if we are to investigate corruption in this country? Is this the only way that we can bring corruption to book, through a commission?
Well, the unfortunate reality is, and I mean, this has been pointed out a lot. I mean, the commission had a budget of R1 billion. The budget for the investigating directorate, and that was, of course, over 3 years. The budget of the investigating directorate, which is responsible for investigating high-level corruption, is 106 million rand. That is a fraction of what the commission got. The commission got incredibly good investigators, extremely experienced senior counsel. And, to its credit, and even the outgoing ID head, Karyn said, the evidence that they uncovered was remarkable and important and will have incredible value going forward if these cases are properly prosecuted. But the question is, can they be properly prosecuted? We haven't seen, as Karyn Maughan pointed out in Parliament in July last year, we haven't seen a big corruption case taken to court for 10 years. So, yes, commissions, I think South Africans are very understandably frustrated with them. It's now about political will to back the NPA, to back the Hawks, law enforcement, financially, so that they get skilled people in, so that they can take these cases to court and they can get convictions. And in circumstances where they can't take cases to court because they just don't have capacity, there needs to be policy in place that enables either state or private hybrid prosecutions or private prosecutions, because we cannot have a situation where, because state capture so fundamentally stripped law enforcement of its teeth, where so many good people left, these cases, the people responsible for that alleged capture then simply get away with it. I don't think that's acceptable, and I think it's now about the ANC government really putting political will behind having law enforcement that can actually do the job.
I mean, Karyn, does that political will even exist?
It has to, because the damage that was done to parastatals, whether it was the rail networks, PRASA, Eskom, this generation's children are going to experience that for decades to come. Our power situation, in many respects, the people like Machela Koko and Brian Molefe would argue that they were the bastions of good governance at Eskom and that their decisions kept the lights on. The fact of the matter is that huge amounts of money, were siphoned off in highly questionable ways that have been found in certain instances to have been manifestly illegal. And we now have a situation where, we have a massively unsure future for our power utility. And yes, certain policies, decisions are being made to try and address that. But we will live the consequences of what happened for decades to come. And, if we don't address this, if there aren't consequences, what's to stop that from happening, next year or this year or 5 years down the line? Because if people know they can get away with things, they will try to get away with things. The biggest mechanism to ensure proper governance is to enable bodies like the Auditor General, like the NPA, like the Hawks, to properly hold people accountable, so that there is a system that ensures that if you either act in an incompetent manner and misspend public funds in a way that is not defensible, or you loot and are guilty of corruption, you will face the consequences for that.
And just your overall assessment of the Zondo Commission in general, what was your overall assessment?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a massive beast of an inquiry. It's huge. So, I mean, just Bosasa, I understand that report is like 1,000 pages long. And that's just on one issue, which has very deep implications for the ANC and its sort of political sponsorship. Transnet, Eskom, I think the state security agency, that for me is going to be a fascinating ambit of this investigation, because Obviously, it has huge implications for intelligence in this country. Are we going to see potentially a referral to another investigation in relation to intelligence in this country? I think it uncovered a huge amount of incredibly pivotal evidence. Some of that evidence has already been used, for example, in the asbestos prosecution against Edwin Sodi and others in the Free State. The Bosasa prosecutions that are currently underway against Vincent Smith, a parliamentarian. There has been attempts to recoup money. We know that there's currently a battle over a red notice issued against the Gupta family by Interpol. All of these things, in some way or another have been assisted by the state capture inquiry, but it is not good enough it's unfair to expect the state capture inquiry to be the one that ensures accountability. It simply legally doesn't have that power. Mm-hmm. And, the tragedy of South Africa, if we look back at the TRC, where there was a recommendation for 350 cases to be investigated and prosecuted and nothing happened. And now this year we see the possibility of an inquiry, a public inquiry into political interference that stopped that from happening. Your legacy of a commission is often not in the hands of that commission. It's in the hands of the president. It's in the hands of the ruling party. Mm-hmm. They ultimately will be responsible for ensuring that real action is taken. And if they don't, the slight on their legacy will continue for decades to come.
All right. Karyn Maughan, thank you so much for talking to us. Legal journalist Karyn Maughan speaking to us about the State Capture Commission report that is due to be released later today. Well, let's take an ad break. Go back after this. Stay with us.